Hey, what's up? Ed Lava here, bringing you another Photoshop tutorial. In today's tutorial, we're going to be taking a deeper look at layers and blending modes. And we're going to make this kind of nifty, abstract glass kind of background thing. So, you can kind of see over here, I've got some layers set up, and I'm going to be taking you through how I did this. But as I click these off, you can kind of see how they lay on top of each other. And normally, if you have a layer on top of another, that top layer is only what you're going to see. But through blending modes, I can overlay them to create some cool effects. So let's get started here. I'm going to come over to File New, and this brings up your new document window. And I'm going to be working in pixels for this, because it's easier for me to relate how big that is to my screen. Now, I think Photoshop starts in inches, and that's nice if you're working in print and you need to have a document a certain size. But it's kind of hard for me to relate on my screen if that's the only medium I'm going to be working on. So I'm going to switch this back to pixels, and my screen is full HD, and what that means is there's 1920 pixels wide and 1080 tall. And basically, the pixels, each dot is what makes up your screen. So across the top of your screen, if you're working in Full HD, there's 1920 of those. And then going down, there's 1080. And below that, you have your resolution. And what that means is, for every inch, say it's set at 72 here, for every inch, there's going to be 72 pixels. And so the higher you set that, the more pixels per inch you're going to have. So instead of 72 going across, it's going to be 300. Say you're working with print and you set it at 72 versus 300. So when your printer prints, it's going to make 300 of those dots, and it'll just be much higher quality. And then you have your color mode. For screens, you're going to be working with RGB. You also have CMYK. That's for print. And below that, you have your background contents. And what I like to do is I like to start this with transparent most of the time, and that just gives you kind of a blank slate. So I'm going to come up here and hit OK. Now I have my new document. I'm going to zoom in once. We have our basic layer here. Now since I start with transparent, I just have an unlocked, completely empty layer. And for this first step, my colors aren't set to their default, so I'm going to hit D on my keyboard, and that's going to reset them. And when I first started with Photoshop, the first thing I did was play around with a lot of filters. And so we're going to kind of be doing that here to create that effect. And filters are there's a lot of fun things you can do with them and create some cool effects by combining them. So we're going to come down here to render and then clouds. And what that'll do, it'll use your background and foreground colors just to kind of create this kind of smoky cloud looking thing. And you can keep doing that filter by hitting Control F. So I'm going to keep doing that until I get something I'm kind of satisfied with. That looks pretty good. And now I am going to apply another filter to this. So with filters, you can kind of stack them together on the same layer. So we're going to come over to Distort Glass. And that'll bring up this new dialog box. I had the window kind of shrunk, so it kind of expanded for me here. And I've brought it in, and still have it set up from the last time I did this. And you can kind of see you have glass over here, and then you have your distortion amount, and that'll change how strong that glass effect is. I'm going to set that to 15. And smoothness kind of softens those edges, so you can kind of have either like just a barely noticeable effect, or come back over here and it pronounces those edges pretty hard. It's like when you go into those buildings and you see those glass walls. This is pretty much that effect. And then scaling we're going to leave at 100. And the last thing is the texture, and that's blocks. That's what that's what's creating that effect. So you also have canvas, frosted, and tiny lens. And so that creates kind of all these different neat effects that you can kind of play around with. But for now I'm going to go with blocks. I'm going to hit OK. You can see now it's added that into my document. So now we're going to add another effect to this, but I want to create a new layer for that. So I'm going to hit this little icon down here to create a new layer. And so anything I add on to this layer will sit on top and won't affect this layer. So I'm free to edit this, do whatever with it, and anything on layer 1 will be unaffected. So what I want to do is I want to fill this document with black because I want to create a lens flare, but you can't add lens flares to a blank layer. So a really easy way to fill the layer is set your foreground color here to black, and then Alt on your keyboard and then backspace will fill your layer with that color. And you can also hold Control and do backspace, and it'll fill it with your background layer. So I'm going to fill it back to black. And now I want to come up here and I want to add a lens flare. So lens flare, and these are kind of basic, but you can do some things to them to make them look a little bit cooler. So we're going to come down to 105 prime. Now before I hit OK, I want to bump up the brightness of this. Something maybe like 140-ish. That'll be pretty good, because we want to create kind of vignette effect where some of the edges are darker, and then it'll be illuminating from the bottom here. There we go. And now I want to take blur, motion blur, and we're going to do it at about 200 pixels. And what it'll do, it'll get rid of some of those raying effects and kind of spread it out here vertically. So it won't be quite the obvious lens flare. It'll look more like a spotlight than it will a lens flare. We're going to hit OK. Now that's fine, but you can't really see any of the layer beneath it. And so to address that, we're going to come over here to where it says normal, and these are your blending modes. Oh, looks like they went off the top there. But there's a lot of options here, and at the top here it's normal, and then below that you have your blending modes that kind of darken the layer. So you have darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and those will darken down layers. And then below that you have the reverse of that. These will lighten the document in various ways. So screen will kind of add that on, and then color dodge is like a harsher version of that, and linear dodge is kind of like a stronger screen. But that's not what we want for now. Below that is these blending modes kind of combine the effects of multiply and the additive blending modes. So based on how dark or light it is how it's going to affect it. So I want to set this to hard light, and you can kind of see it darkened down over here, and it also brightened it up over here, and it kind of makes it look like there's some sort of either bright light down here or it's shining on here, and that's the kind of effect I was looking for here. Now there's this big kind of bright bulb down here, and I don't want that on here. I just want more of the glow. So there's an easy way to fix this, and I'm going to come up here to edit, then transform. Now you can also do this with Control T, but for now I'm going to go with scale. I'm going to zoom out here, and you see these little points come up around the outside of the image of this layer, and I can drag on this to kind of pull that bright spot below the document. Now you want to be careful with transforming, because on a normal photo, if you expand it too much, you're going to start losing quality, because there's only so much data that an image holds that can be expanded before it'll start looking blurry. But for now I'm going to hit OK. Okay, it's starting to look kind of similar to what I had before. Now, I kind of want to create kind of this cool smoky effect on top of this. And to do that, we're going to create a new layer. So again, this won't be affecting the two layers below it. But we're going to come back to the clouds filter, but we're going to do one more thing with it this time. So we're going to come over to render clouds. And then right below that is difference clouds. And that'll really kind of create this smoky effect, and you can continue doing this to change how this looks. So I'm going to do that a few times by hitting Control F. And I'm kind of looking for this kind of cool glowing edge kind of looking thing. And I'm going to set it to color dodge this time. So it's kind of overlays on this in an interesting way. But it's a little too bright down here. So we're going to come over here to where it says opacity. And this is a really great function to kind of pull back effects, allowing you a lot more control over how they look. Alternatively, there's fill down here. And what fill will do is just kind of empty out the layer. And if there's a layer style on it, you can still see the layer style. But for now, we're going to go with opacity. And we're going to pull that down to about 50%. So instead of this blown out thing, you can kind of see it's there, but not too much. And I was dragging that by scrubbing the opacity. And what that basically means, if you click on opacity here, you can drag left or right to change the amount. Or alternatively, there's a slider if you click on the actual box. So that looks pretty good at 50%. So now I'm going to do something a little differently, and I'm going to create a shape layer. And shapes work a bit differently than normal layers. Now you want to make sure it's clicked on this first box here, and what that'll do is that'll create a vector. And a vector works differently than everything else I've done, because you can size a vector to any amount and it'll retain its quality no matter how big or small it gets. And I'm going to come over here to the color, and I'm going to set this kind of to a medium blue. So I want to increase the amount of color I'm getting in my document here by layering this on top. I'm going to create this nice big circle. And you can create a perfect circle by holding Shift. If you hold Alt and Shift, it'll drag it out from the center. There we are. So I'm going to kind of position this kind of halfway at the document. And you can see this ring around the edge of it, and that's basically the path that it's working from. So it's completely closed, so anything inside of that path is going to show up as your vector. I'm going to increase the size on this a little bit. And you can see when I transform, you see the points that show up, and those are basically the corner points of the vector. And now I'm going to come over here and right click on this, and it says up here rasterize layer. And what that'll do is remove the vector from it and turn it into a raster image, which is basically what normal photos work with. So I've done that, and now it's affected by the normal restraints of photographs. So if I expand this too much, it's going to start losing quality. So you can see the edge is getting kind of pixelated now. So I'm going to undo that real quick. And then I want to blur this. So I'm going to come over to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to click on Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to blur this out pretty big. Something like 85, maybe a little higher. 105. There we go. I'm going to hit OK. And I kind of want to layer this on just subtly so it adds that blue color to my background here. A really great tool for that is soft light. It's kind of subtle, but it'll usually overlay the color pretty nicely on what's below. It's great for adding saturation without destroying the texture that's underneath of it. I want to make that a little bit bigger, so I'm going to zoom out again, and I'm going to hold Shift and Alt and drag on the corners, and what I'll do is increase it in all directions. Okay. Now, for this next effect, I want to duplicate a layer. And doing that's really simple. You can click on a layer, and you can hit Control J, and that'll duplicate that layer. Now, if you have something selected, and you hit Control J, it'll duplicate what you have selected. So if I come back over here, I take my marquee, and I hit Control J, now I only have that portion that is selected. So I can move that around, and it'll just be a piece of what I selected there. So I'm going to undo that and deselect by hitting Control D, and I'm going to hit Control J again. Now you can also duplicate a layer by dragging it to the new layer icon, and that'll also create a duplicate no matter what you have selected. Now I want to create some more depth to this background. And to do that, I'm going to go up to Filter, Stylize, Emboss. And what this will do is kind of create this metallic effect with some highlights and shadows added to how mostly the contours of what it was set on top of. If you see I drag this around, you can kind of see how the highlights are pointing towards the bottom, and then you have some shadows facing out towards the top. So right here is a good example of it. See, it's highlighted here, and then shadow here. And I don't want this to be too strong, so I still have it set up from last time. So height 7 pixels and 95%. And you can kind of see as I drag this little angle dial around how the light changes. So if I have it at 0, the light doesn't really match up to my light source anymore. I want it pointed towards the bottom. So I'm going to set it back to negative 90%. And I'm going to hit OK. And so if I zoom in here, you can kind of see it's kind of overridden my original texture here, and I don't want that. So I'm going to come back over here to my blending mode. I'm going to set it to soft light for this layer as well. And now you can kind of see just adds a little bit to it, kind of a little edge along some of these spots here, makes them pop a little bit more. Zoom back out. So that's looking pretty good now. It's coming together. But I'm going to come over here and click on this shape 1 layer, and I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. Now you can rearrange layers just by dragging them and dropping them beneath other ones. And you kind of can affect how they blend together here. So you see when I dragged this color dodge layer below, it kind of just blended the texture together in a way that's not really what I wanted. Kind of destroys the effect. I'm going to put that back. And you can rearrange layers back to where they were by hitting Control Z or Control Alt Z. So I'm going to come back up to my top layer. I'm going to reset my colors again by hitting D. And we're going to create another clouds effect. And then we're going to come back and do difference clouds again. There we go. And I'm going to add one more effect to it this time. So we're going to come back down to Stylize, Glowing Edges. And it's popped up in the big box again. And this kind of takes those edges and really stylizes them in a way that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Bunch of kind of squiggly root things. And the edge width will kind of set how wide they are. I'm going to set that at 2. The brightness can either really brighten it up or just barely. And smoothness, I'm going to set at 5. And then I'm going to come up here and hit OK. Alright, and then once again, it's not very useful by itself. So I'm going to come over here and set it to color dodge. And if I zoom in here, now it's kind of added this smoky effect to the glass. And the great thing about working with opacity is you kind of layer the effects together and pull them back to where you want. So you may like this at 100%, but I want to pull it back to about 50%. I don't want it to be so overbearing. Just kind of have it as an extra texture in there. That's not quite so obvious. So that just about does it. Now, if you're a little bit more advanced, you'll see on my original here that I've added one more effect in here, and I used the brush tool. So if you're familiar with the brush, you can kind of take like a soft blue brush, kind of create some cool highlight spots to the glass. And I set that to soft light. So if I bring that back, you can kind of see what I did here. And setting that to soft light will just kind of create these bright spots on the glass. That'll just about do it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we'll be taking a look at vectors, the text tool, and styles. Thanks for watching.